ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to speak on behalf of Afrexim Bank on a challenge that strikes at the core of Africa's development, bridging our health financing gap. Allow me to commend the African Union Commission for putting health financing at the center of our discussions this week. I would also like to thank the government of South Africa for their warm hospitality and for the excellent arrangements made for the meetings. Your Excellencies, a strong health system is not only a moral imperative, it is also an economic necessity, a cornerstone for resilience and a prerequisite for Africa's demographic dividend. Africa still faces a staggering shortfall, billions of dollars each year, in the resources needed to build resilient health systems. COVID-19 revealed how fragile our systems are, while today's shift in geoeconomic context, slowing global growth, debt pressures, and competing crises makes financing even harder. Too often, our health systems depend on unpredictable donor funds. Too often, fiscal constraints force governments to choose between servicing debt and saving lives. At Afrexim Bank, we have seen firsthand how health and finance intersect. When the COVID-19 pandemic threatened to paralyze our economies, the bank responded quickly with a pandemic trade impact mitigation facility, which kept supply chains moving and ensured much-needed liquidity. Working with the Africa CDC and the UNECA, we established the African Medical Supplies Platform, which has since been adopted as Africa's pool procurement mechanism. We also put in place a $2 billion advanced procurement guarantee, which helped secure 400 million doses of vaccines for Africa and the Caribbean, thus at a time when Africa and the Caribbean were abandoned by other partners. Colleagues, lessons from COVID demonstrate that health is not a cost, it is an investment. A healthy population is the foundation of productivity, prosperity, and stability. Without closing this gap, Africa cannot fully unlock its demographic dividend to meet the promise of Agenda 2063. But we need bold solutions. We need to prioritize domestic resources and treat health as central to national budgets, supported by fair taxation and innovative financing. We need to catalyze private capital, working with African multilateral financial institutions, such as Afrexim Bank, to provide blended finance, to provide risk-sharing tools, and to ensure partnerships that make health attractive to investors. We need to harness African integration by pooling procurement under the AFCFTA to reduce costs and strengthen the bargaining power and empowering the Africa CDC to coordinate continental responses. And we need to leverage technology, from digital health to local pharmaceutical manufacturing, turning Africa into a hub of innovation. Honorable Ministers, we must act with urgency. Bridging Africa's health financing gap is not only about saving lives. It is about securing the future of our continent. The broader importance of this work is clear. Health financing is not just about clinics or medicines. It is about Africa's ability to shape its own destiny, especially in a time of great global uncertainty. Strong health systems underpins productivity, deepens intra-African trade, and supports sustainable development. Let us commit to building health systems that are resilient, inclusive, and sustainable. Let us ensure that no African is denied care because of poverty or geography. And let us remind the world that investing in Africa's health is investing in global stability and shared prosperity. As the STC meeting continues its deliberation, Afrexim Bank reaffirms its commitment to stand with member states, the AU Commission, and our continental and global partners to close Africa's health financing gap. A healthy Africa is a prosperous Africa. I thank you.
And Investment Development Insurance, ATIDI. Mr. Manuel Moses, please come in as well with your remarks.
Thank you, Excellency. Distinguished ministers, ladies and gentlemen, We are honored to be here, and we want to thank our host, South Africa, and the African Union for organizing this STC and inviting us to share our remarks. I'm honored to address this session on health financing. Health is the cornerstone of Africa's development, driving productivity, resilience, and inclusive growth. Yet, health financing remains fragile, fragmented, and too often impeded by volatility and out-of-pocket budgets. Today, I present a focused, implementable path for strengthening health financing across our continent, anchored in ATID's instruments and the collaborative action with AU and the wider alliance of African financial institutions. We need a clear diagnosis. Limited and volatile domestic resources for health, particularly at district and rural levels, exist. Financing fragmentation and high out-of-pocket expenditures undermine the financial protection. Gaps in preventive and primary health care, health information system, and resilient supply chains still exist. Health emergencies expose budgetary weakness and demand rapid and coordinated responses. Our shared vision is a resilient, equitable health financing architecture that pools risks, pools funds, and incentivizes value for money. Greater domestic resource mobilization, complemented by smart and concessional finance and innovative instruments, are required. Health Financing Foundation supports the universal health coverage. I think this is a UN goal, and the broader developmental objectives. In the context of the earlier session on the Compact with Africa, we applaud the ongoing expansion of the G20 Compact with Africa, led by South Africa this year. An expanded Compact with Africa pledges to strengthen the reforms to mobilize private finance and enable policy predictability across more countries. ATID stands ready to leverage Compact with Africa synergies to accelerate health financing reforms and to improve project pipelines and to scale bankable health initiatives. Our call for the G20 Common Framework is that it must include African views. We urge the G20 Common Framework to be more inclusive of African financial institutions and regional institutions in their governance implementation for wider benefit sharing. The key reforms that we suggest include more visible and formal channels to engage with African institutions in the restructuring of debt and how debt is treated for development programs under the framework. Country-led sequencing support for country-owned reforms agenda is very essential and timely. We also want to recognize Africa's diversity in its financial capacity and its health needs. As already been said by the previous speakers, investing in Africa's health is investing in the world's stability. We are also urging for data and transparency, robust data that can be used for impact evaluation, accountability mechanisms, and to track health financing outcomes. Local currency financing and blended finance options and greater use of these tools can help in improving access to financing for health initiatives. Technical assistance and capacity building and enhanced support from our institutions can also be used by the Ministers of Finance present here. Our priority actions for impact. We are proposing a health financing compact under the leadership of the AU, co-designed, of course, with the CDC, Africa CDC, and that brings in together the support and the strength of our African institutions that are willing and able to support these initiatives that help to improve health financing. On a wider note, I think African financial institutions, in the context of the ground shifting under us, we need to step up as Africans to figure out how to support our health initiatives on our own, given that the health budgets have disappeared or have been taken away. So we need to respond, creating innovative solutions around this. As ATD, we commit to supporting Africa as health initiatives. We commit to support the innovative instruments required to support the gaps that have been created, because we can only be the ones who can develop and chart our own path, knowing that Africa's future rests with the people in this room We thank you and for this opportunity to share our remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tidi. Interesting remarks. Right, next week's on a slight move on the list here, but we'll ask the Chief Executive Officer of AUDA NEPAD, Her Excellency Nardos Bekele Thomas, to please come in and make some remarks too.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Excellencies, ministers that are here, Ministers of Finance, Ministers of Health, Your Excellency, the Commissioner. It's so wonderful to see you at the 1st STC here. So you're most welcome. My colleagues that are here, all protocols observed. A very good morning to you all. It's my great honor to address you at the 8th session of the Specialized Technical Committee. After 3 days of intense discussions at the expert level, the responsibility now rests with you, our ministers, to chart the political and financial direction of our continent's future. I have 5 points. The first one is just to discuss about Africa, which is at economic crossroads. Africa faces a sovereign reality. It's been said, global growth is slowing, interest rates remain high, and debt burdens weigh heavily on our economies. Many of our states now devote nearly a fifth of export revenues to servicing debt, leaving little fiscal room for investment in infrastructure, in education, mostly in health and industrialization. External financing is shrinking. ODA to Africa is projected to fall by 70% between 2021 and 2025. At the same time, Africa continues to lose between $50 and $89 billion annually to illicit financial flows, draining resources that should fund our own priorities. Meanwhile, our infrastructure needs are vast. Africa requires $130 to $170 billion annually, yet current commitments reach only about half that level, leaving in financing that costs us up to 2 percentage points of GDP growth each year. These figures tell us one thing: business as usual will not deliver the Africa we want. The second one is health, which is our subject matter, as a test of sovereignty. The health sector illustrates both the challenge and the opportunity. On average, African governments spend just 2% of GDP on health, compared to 6% globally. This underinvestment leaves us vulnerable, even as Africa's health economy is projected to grow to $259 billion by 2030. So this $259 billion is an opportunity. To respond, we in the African Union Development Agency, we have launched the Program for Investment and Financing in Africa's Health Sector, which we call the PIFA, under the leadership of President Kagame as the ALM champion. PIFA mobilizes private capital through blended finance, philanthropy partnerships, and regional hubs. We're preparing investment-ready projects, ensuring that health is not charity, but a high-growth sector. 2 flagship actions are underway. The first one is the operationalization of the regional health financing hubs to pool and scale resources. The second one is engaging the private sector through platforms such as the Africa Pharma Resource Database. We are also advancing pharmaceutical sovereignty through the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, the PMPA. 24 essential medicines, ranging from HIV and malaria to maternal and child health, have been prioritized for local production, reducing imports, saving foreign exchange, and creating jobs. And with 1 billion mobile subscription, the African Union Development Agency is embedding digital health innovations. The African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Program, the AU Smart Safety Surveillance System, and new governance models for malaria control technologies, which we call the Integrated Vector Management Program. Health is therefore both a test and a model. If we can finance health domestically, we can also finance our infrastructure, our industries, and our future. The third one is infrastructure. Infrastructure as a foundation, the challenges and the progress. Excellencies, the challenge is clear. Africa's infrastructure deficit continues to fragment our markets, constrain competitiveness, and slow growth. The continent needs at least $360 billion through 2040 to close gaps in energy, which is fundamental, in transport, in ICT, and water. Without stronger connectivity, the African Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, will under-deliver, and our economies will remain trapped in exporting raw commodities instead of building regional value chains. Yet, progress is visible. Africa's infrastructure spending reached an average of 83 billion annually between 2016 and 2020, with 41% coming from African governments themselves, 48% from development partners, and 11% from private investors. Several countries now allocate more than 5% of GDP to infrastructure, showing what is possible when priorities are aligned. Development banks have doubled disbursement for infrastructure from 4.2 billion in 2010 to 8.2 billion in 2023, while the African Union Development Agency, the one that I lead, PIDA's quality label, and the Infrastructure Project Preparation Facility have accelerated bankable pipelines, unlocking billions in financing. The way forward is clear. We must crowd in far more private capital. Evidence shows that infrastructure projects in energy, water, and communications have among the lowest default rates, 4 to 5%. Yet Africa attracts only a fraction of global private investment. Encouragingly, member states are harmonizing regulatory frameworks, improving business environments, and deepening cross-border cooperation. At the same time, Africa's pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, managing nearly $4 trillion in assets, are beginning to allocate more capital to infrastructure as a secure long-term investment. And we should encourage these institutional financing instruments to put more in infrastructure. The African Union Development Agency, your agency, is working to make this shift irreversible by supporting member states and the regional economic communities in project structuring and risk management, by strengthening national capacity to prepare and deliver bankable projects, by embedding corridor treaties and regional agreements to ensure sustainability, and by innovating with blended finance guarantees and instruments, new instruments to channel institutional and private capital into Africa's infrastructure. I underscored infrastructure because it's fundamental, it's foundational. It is not just an enabler of growth, it is the foundation for health, for industrialization, for education, and for, in general, all development sectors. Number fourth message is the fact that financing Africa's transformation should be from within. We should have confidence in ourselves. Excellencies, this brings us to the central question: how will Africa finance its transformation? First is African multilateral financial institutions, the Afrexim Bank, the Trade and Development Bank, Africa 50, we have to understand they are our backbone. Their preferred creditor status is non-negotiable. Without it, their ability to raise affordable capital collapses. We need to support this. The second one is domestic financial markets must be mobilized. Africa holds nearly $4 trillion in pension funds, sovereign wealth, and insurance assets. With the right reforms and de-risking tools, this capital can finance infrastructure, energy, and industry. Lastly, central banks and monetary authorities must evolve. Stability alone will not build corridors or hospitals. Central banks must also help finance growth through infrastructure bonds, blended facilities, and regional instruments. Fifth message is that the Luanda milestone, our financial sovereignty. This is why the Luanda Declaration of May 2025 was historic. Under President Lorenzo's leadership, the African Union Development Agency, and the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions launched the African Union Development Fund. This fund is not simply financial. It is a declaration of African financial sovereignty. It's our sovereign platform to mobilize African capital for African priorities and bridge the 3 trillion financing gap of Agenda 2063 by complementing capital that is available in our MDBs and other financial instruments. The last one is a call to action. Excellencies, the way forward is very clear. First, we have to defend the preferred creditor status of African financial institutions. Two, we should operationalize the African Union Development Fund, which is complementing all the funds that are available within the continent. Three is we have to reform our monetary systems to finance growth, yes, but not just inflation. Our monetary systems should not only finance growth and should finance growth and not inflation. Number four is we need to mobilize domestic capital markets for health, infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and industry, understanding that health is not just a sector. Health means infrastructure, health means education, health means industrialization, health is everything. A holistic approach is important. Number five is we need to fast track our AFCFTA, the PIDA, which is our Infrastructure Development for Africa program, the PIDA, which is our program for industrialization, the CADEP, which is our program for agriculture and food systems, CMP, which is our program, the Continental Master Plan, which is our program for energy, both generation, but also generation, transmission, and distribution, and also the creation of the market, and AMDC. Six is end illicit financial flows, and illicit financial flows that rob Africa of its future. In conclusion, Excellencies, I would like to say that Africa is not passive. We are not here for bailouts or sympathy. We are here to lead, to design, and to deliver. The hospitals we finance, the corridors we build, the industries we scale, the energy we generate, and the food we produce will determine whether Agenda 2063 becomes a reality or remains just a slogan. The choice is ours. Let us be bold, let us be disciplined, and let us deliver. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Right, next we are going to be asking the CEO of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, Her Excellency, Ambassador Mary Antoinette Rose Quatre, to actually come in and also make some remarks.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to address this 8th session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Finance, Monetary Affairs, Economic Planning and Integration, a key organ of our Union entrusted with advancing the continent's economic integration, strengthening macroeconomic stability and shaping policies that drive sustainable development across the continent. And I would like to thank the AUC for successfully convening this important session. The theme before us, bridging Africa's health financing gap in a changing geo-economic context, is both urgent and timely. We meet at a time when fiscal space across our continent is narrowing. Debt pressures are intensifying, and yet the demands on our health systems have never been greater. And the message is clear. Africa cannot afford fragmented responses. To advance our development agenda, we must align fiscal policies with social priorities, and nowhere is this more evident than in the health financing. In the face of the current challenges, the APRM is stepping up to provide African-owned solutions to systemic financial vulnerabilities that directly affect health and human development. And one of the most strategic initiatives mandated to us by this committee is the operationalization of the African Credit Agency, AFCRA. And let me reiterate that AFCRA is not just another institution. It is a bold continental response to structural inequities in the global financial architecture. For far too long, Africa has been subjected to external assessments of risk that are too often biased, pro-cyclical, and disconnected from our realities. These ratings not only misprice African sovereign debt, but also directly constrain our ability to mobilize affordable capital for health, education, infrastructure, and resilience. With AFCRA, Africa is claiming its narrative by providing independent, credible, and transparent ratings anchored in African realities while upholding international best practice, reducing the cost of capital and correcting distortions in how Africa is assessed, offering governments a space to finance long-term development priorities, including health systems, without being unfairly penalized in the markets. Excellencies, a little more than a year ago, I was given the mandate to operationalize AFCRA by June 2025. 2 months more, because we wanted to ensure a rigorous, methodical, and transparent process. The APR has worked tirelessly under the guidance of our heads of state and government to make AFCRA a reality. Excellencies, this is a defining moment. If Africa is serious about bridging its health financing gap, then we must also be serious about addressing the structural constraints that keep financing expensive and scarce. AFCRA is not an option, it is a necessity, and today before us, a reality. We therefore call on our finance ministers, central bank governors, and policymakers here today to actively advocate for AFCRA's role in financing Africa's development, not as a parallel to existing agencies, but as Africa's legitimate voice in a system that has for too long often spoken about us, without us, and in many instances behind us. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our continent's health systems cannot be resilient if our financing systems are fragile. The pathway to universal health coverage, pandemic preparedness, and social equity runs through sustainable financing. Yet, sustainable financing requires financial justice. AFCRA is part of that justice. The ARM remains committed to working with you all, our member states, the AU Commission, especially the A-Team Commission, our partners at the AFDB, UNECA, Afrexim Bank, to ensure that Africa's development is financed fairly, equitably, and on terms defined by us. Let us advance our bold commitment to close Africa's health financing gap. This requires that we not only mobilize more resources, but that we also transform the architecture that governs, assess those resources. As I conclude, I am pleased to update the Honourable Ministers of the following key milestones towards the operationalization of AFCRA. Following a comprehensive and competitive bidding process administered through an independent transaction advisor, the Republic of Mauritius has been selected as a primary jurisdiction for the registration of AFCRA. Through the Financial Services Commission of Mauritius, APRM is currently in the process of registering AFCRA and securing a license to issue credit ratings. In parallel, we are assessing additional jurisdictions across Africa that will host AFCRA's regional subsidiaries. By the end of this year, AFCRA will have an established office, a robust shareholding base, and a strong management structure with preparations on the way to issue its first ratings in 2026. And finally, I'm delighted to inform you that AFCRA will be fully operational by the second quarter of 2026, when its first ratings are expected to be issued. I would like to reassure this August STC meeting that the process of establishing AFCRA has progressed steadily with the support of our esteemed member states, partners, financial and legal experts, the private sector, and multilateral financial institutions. All indications suggest that the continental marketplace is ready for AFCRA, and prospective shareholders have not only expressed strong interest, but also demonstrated confidence and trust in the work undertaken so far. I would also like to reiterate that, as mandated by the esteemed AU Assembly, AFCRA will be a fully African-owned and private sector-driven entity. It will operate independently, without influence from sentimental or political considerations. Its mandate is not to offer preferential ratings, but rather to provide fairer and more accurate alternative credit ratings for the continent. Excellencies, the time for African solutions to African challenges is now. AFCRA is Africa's statement to the world that our position is non-negotiable. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. Next, we'll ask the World Health Organization representative to South Africa, Shenaz Al-Halabi, to also come in with some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the chair floor. Excellencies, honorable ministers, heads of delegations, distinguished delegates, all protocol observed. It is indeed a great pleasure for the World Health Organization to address this inaugural meeting of African Union Finance and Health Ministers. And it is an honor for me to represent and present on behalf of the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros. Let me start by commending the government of and the people of South Africa for their leadership and hospitality, not only as hosts today, but also as the G20 presidency that has consistently ensured African voices and priorities are heard in global health and finance debates. Their G20 presidency has truly been ours as a continent. For the last few decades, the health systems of many African countries have been shaped by funding decisions made in other countries outside our continent. As a result, health systems have become highly vulnerable to financial shocks. WHO's recent assessment identified 27 countries in the African region whose health systems face critical levels of financial fragility, leaving them unable to absorb disruptions or sustain essential services without external support. This reality underscores why tough but necessary reforms and a transformation of the rules of global and regional health finance and governance are indispensable for advancing the sovereignty and sustainability of health systems in Africa. At the domestic level, this means prioritizing health in national budgets, improving efficiencies and public financial management, building local capacities, and deploying non-traditional financing approaches to mobilize and align funding streams. These critical policy solutions form part of a multi-pronged strategy that World Health Organization recommends to strengthen health systems in Africa. One such measure is health taxes, which have proven to be a powerful tool and a triple win for governments. They save lives, reduce health system costs, and generate sustainable revenue. Countries in Africa are already seeing results. In South Africa, taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages has reduced consumption by nearly 30% per person. In Ghana and Botswana, excise tax reforms have yielded significant revenue gains, expanding the fiscal space for health investments. Excellencies, there could not be a more critical or opportune time for this dialogue between finance and health ministers at the continental level. And WHO will remain your steadfast partners on this journey towards health sovereignty and financial resilience. We applaud the outcomes of the Africa Health Sovereignty Summit, convened recently by His Excellency President John Mahama of Ghana. The summit launched several bold initiatives to advance country-led, investment-driven health systems in Africa. We must also recognize the commitments made by African Union member states through the African Leadership Meeting agenda on domestic resource mobilization, which is much more relevant than ever in today's shifting geopolitical landscape. Together, these initiatives put African priorities at the center of African health sovereignty and align perfectly with our shared commitment on achieving universal health coverage and the Sustainable Development Goals. At the technical level, WHO will continue to work closely with African governments to strengthen fiscal space, implement health financing reforms, and reduce out-of-pocket expenditure. Encouragingly, 80% of the countries in the WHO African region have registered improvements in financial protection. At the global level, we will continue to facilitate and deepen the dialogue between the health and finance sectors. This includes in our work as well as Secretariat to the G20 Joint Finance and Health Task Force, where the African Union is also represented, and through the UHC Knowledge Hub in Japan, which was recently established in collaboration with the World Bank to advance evidence-driven policy exchange. WHO will also contribute by increasing transparency and accountability around this agenda. This year's landmark World Health Assembly resolution on strengthening health financing globally, led by Nigeria and co-sponsored by over 25 countries, calls for more reforms in terms of domestic investments and deeper governance reforms. Through this resolution, member states called for stronger WHO role in supporting countries to develop prioritized national health financing roadmaps, improve the quality and availability of financing data, and producing regular reports on the state of global health financing. Sustainable health financing is not only central to universal health coverage, it is also vital for pandemic preparedness and response, as mentioned earlier by previous speakers. At the request of the South African G20 presidency, WHO, in collaboration with OECD and the World Bank, have developed a comprehensive report with tailored recommendations on strengthening finance for pandemic preparedness and response. Once approved by the G20 Joint Finance and Health Task Force, it will provide an important roadmap for global, regional, and national level action. Excellencies, we must leverage the political commitment generated from the African Union ALM agenda to the African Health Sovereignty Summit, the South African G20 presidency, and the World Health Assembly, which have all placed health financing firmly at the center of the development agenda. As we often say, health is not a cost to be contained, but a strategic public investment to be nurtured. It is a driver of economic growth, which yields social stability, significant economic returns, and Africa's demographic dividend. The tools, strategies, and political will are already in place. What remains is to embrace these and act decisively together. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to ask the Commissioner for Health, Humanitarian Services and Social Development Department of the Africa Union Commission, Ambassador Ama Tuum Amoa, to please also present. I think it's a virtual one.
Yes, indeed, Honorable Minister, it is virtual. And thank you. Honorable Enoch Godongwana, Minister for Finance of the Republic of South Africa. Honorable Neil Richkenberg, Chair of the STC Bureau and Minister for Finance of the Kingdom of Eswatini. Honorable Ministers of Finance, Economic Planning and Integration, and Ministers of Health. My dear sister, Excellency Francisca Belobi, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Minerals. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to join you for this critical ministerial segment of the 8th Specialized Technical Committee on Finance, Monetary Affairs, Economic Planning and Integration. Allow me to commend the STC Bureau, the government of South Africa, and all convening institutions for placing human capital, especially health, at the center of Africa's economic transformation agenda. Excellencies, as we all know, we meet at a time when the global development landscape is undergoing a significant transformation. We face multiple crises, pandemics, climate shocks, conflicts, physical distress, and many more, but also unprecedented political resolve. The question before us is not whether we should act. It is how boldly and how collectively we can act to build systems that are integrated, inclusive, and resilient. Today, health is no longer just a social good. It is a fundamental human right. It is an economic imperative. The evidence is clear, and we've heard it. Every $1 invested in health yields up to $10 in economic return. Inversely, health shocks erase years of growth in weeks. In this light, we must view health financing not as an expenditure, but as a strategic capital investment in Africa's prosperity and stability. At the African Union Commission, we are advancing a comprehensive continent-led vision for strengthening health systems anchored in resilience. Our mandate spans health, humanitarian affairs, and social development, enabling us to build integrated solutions that address pandemics, poverty, protection, and prevention. We are working through flagship institutions like the Africa CDC, which has now disbursed over 129 million from the Pandemic Fund to strengthen surveillance and emergency response. The newly operational African Medicines Agency, or AMA in short, is bringing regulatory autonomy, and the emerging African Humanitarian Agency, which will reinforce our collective ability to respond to crisis. These are not abstract bureaucracies. They are tools for continental resilience. Excellencies, we have momentum, but we must now accelerate and align our efforts. Let me acknowledge 3 landmark leadership initiatives. His Excellency President Paul Kagame has continued to demonstrate continental leadership in building efficient, domestically financed health systems. Rwanda's commitment to health insurance reform and digital health innovation is a model showing that with political will, resource constraints can be overcome. The Lusaka Agenda, endorsed in 2023, is our continent's roadmap for financing HIV, UHC, and essential services amid donor transitions. It calls for pooled procurement, regional manufacturing, and strategic repurposing of vertical funds. The Africa Health Financing Dialogue, led by His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama, of Ghana earlier this year marked a turning point. It is not just a call to action. It was a reset, a demand for equitable burden sharing, smarter investments, and African control over health systems financing. We support the Accra Reset as a platform for follow-through. These efforts must not remain isolated. They must converge into one bold ambition: health sovereignty for Africa. Today, I propose 3 actions for your consideration. First, let us jointly endorse a continental health investment compact built around the Africa Health Strategy, the Lusaka Agenda, and the principles of the Accra Reset. This compact must align public budgets, private capital, and regional mechanisms to protect and scale our health gains. Second, we must tap into innovative financing instruments, such as social climate and the third, we must ensure that we commit that to call pandemic fund aligned to our systems and priorities. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, and colleagues, Africa's future will not be decided in Geneva, but in Addis Ababa, Yaoundé, Habura capital, where with limited fiscal space. The challenge is real, but alignment of partnership and political will, we can build where no mother given birth, no child is left behind in debt payments and public health. In the spirit of Agenda 2063, Excellencies, let us rise, not as fragmented actors, but as a united Africa with the will and the means to shape destiny. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Appreciate that. The next, I'm going to ask the Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry, Mineral Department of the Africa Union Commission, Her Excellency Francina Belobe, to be able to come in. Francisco Belobe, to come in and also give us her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning again, everyone. I will try to bring some diversity in this meeting. So while switching to another language, bueno, primero quiero agradecer a todos los aquí presentes por haber acudido masivamente a esta reunión. Me voy a volver a presentar porque es la primera vez que asisto a esta reunión bajo el departamento que tengo el honor de llevar desde muy recientemente en el seno de la Comisión de la Unión Africana. Para los ministros con los cuales estaré trabajando en nuestros diferentes países miembros. Mi nombre es Francisca Belobe, como ya se dijo, y soy su comisaria de Asuntos Económicos y demás asuntos vinculados a este departamento, que son comercio, turismo, industria y minas. Voy a pasar a la presentación del discurso. Muchas gracias. Que será en francés. Muchas gracias. Excellence, Monsieur Enoch Gondongwana, ministre des Finances de la République du Sud, notre aimable hôte. Excellence, Monsieur Neil Reichenberg, ministre des Finances de l'Eswatini et président du bureau de cette réunion. Excellences, Madame et Monsieur, le ministre des Finances et de Santé, Excellences, ma chère sœur, commissaire chargée du développement de la santé, des services humanitaires et du développement social de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Madame ambassadrice Amatoum Amoa, les représentants de l'Organisation mondiale de la santé en Afrique du Sud, Shenaz El Halabi, les représentants des organisations différentes de nos partenaires du système des Nations Unies. Permettez-moi de briefer pour ne pas prendre beaucoup de temps. Le représentant des institutions spécialisées de l'Union africaine, chers représentants et partenaires des banques et institutions financières, tout protocole observé, mesdames et messieurs. C'est au nom du président de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Son Excellence Mahmoud Ali Youssouf, que je prends la parole pour vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cette 8e session du comité technique spécialisé sur les finances, les affaires monétaires, la planification économique et l'intégration. Je voudrais tout particulièrement exprimer ma profonde gratitude au gouvernement et au peuple de la République d'Afrique du Sud pour leur accueil chaleureux et leur hospitalité. Votre générosité témoigne de l'esprit de solidarité et de fraternité africaine qui nous guide dans notre quête commune d'intégration et de prospérité. Cette 8e session du comité technique spécialisé qui se tient ici à Johannesburg en Afrique du Sud s'articule autour du thème « Combler les déficits de financement de la santé en Afrique » dans un contexte géoéconomique en pleine évolution, défis et solutions potentielles. Ce thème est d'une importance majeure. Il reflète d'abord une prise de conscience relative que le financement de la santé ne relève pas uniquement du secteur sanitaire. Bien au-delà, il constitue une question des politiques économiques, financières et de gouvernance au plus haut niveau de nos États. Il nous engage alors, il vous engage à vous, ministre de la Santé, ministre des Finances, gouverneur de banque centrale, planificateur économique et partenaire au développement, à bâtir une vision intégrée. L'Afrique ne pourra atteindre ses aspirations de l'agenda 2063 sans des systèmes de santé solides, équitables et universels. Or, les besoins actuels dépassent largement les ressources disponibles. Les déficits de financement se chiffrent à plusieurs dizaines de milliards de dollars par an. Nous l'avons écouté de la représentante de l'OMS ici. Alors même que les chocs géoéconomiques mondiaux tels que l'inflation, l'instabilité des marchés financiers, les changements climatiques ou encore des crises sécuritaires exercent une pression accrue sur nos budgets nationaux. C'est pourquoi alors cette session à Johannesburg qui est d'une importance capitale. Cette rencontre vise à trouver des mécanismes de financement de la santé innovants pour l'Afrique, L'objectif est de construire des systèmes de santé résilients et accessibles à tous et de consolider une position africaine commune avant les grands événements internationaux comme la COP30 et la présidence sud-africaine du G20. Les discussions se concentrent alors sur la mobilisation des ressources nationales, l'efficacité des dépenses et les liens étroits entre les politiques budgétaires et la santé publique. Nous avons aussi compris de la part de certains intervenants que le choix des systèmes de santé sont notamment très relevants. Les ministres des Finances, de la Santé et des gouverneurs des banques centrales vont collaborer pour trouver des solutions durables en renforçant la voix de l'Afrique dans la gouvernance économique mondiale en libérant des marges budgétaires pour le développement social. Selon certains protocoles de l'Union africaine, la désignation budgétaire pour les questions de santé devait être à 15%. Ça a été dit, aujourd'hui, nous nous retrouvons qu'ils sont à moins de 7% dans nos différents budgets nationaux. L'Afrique doit alors absolument résoudre son déficit de financement de santé, estimé à 66 milliards de dollars par an, selon la Commission économique des Nations Unies pour l'Afrique. Les pays africains dépensent en moyenne moins de 5% de leur PIB pour la santé, bien en dessus du minimum de 15% qui a été recommandé par l'Organisation mondiale de la santé. Cette manque de financement fragilise les systèmes de santé et accroît les inégalités d'accès aux soins. De plus, les ménages supportent une part insoutenable des dépenses avec plus de 36% de dépenses ménagères payées directement par les citoyens contre une moyenne mondiale de 18%. Donc, double fois la dépense sur le ménage en Afrique. Cela plonge des millions de familles dans la pauvreté absolue. Pour y remédier, il est crucial de mobiliser davantage de ressources domestiques, notamment en luttant contre le flux financier illicite qui représente une perte de plus de 88 milliards de dollars par an, selon certaines estimations. Il y en a d'autres qui parlent de plus de 500 milliards par an. Des solutions innovantes comme les obligations de santé pourraient ainsi diversifier les sources de financement. Il est donc nécessaire d'avoir une coordination intersectorielle entre le ministère de la Santé et des Finances. Près de 600 millions d'Africains n'ont toujours pas accès à des services de santé essentiels, un chiffre qui ne diminuera pas si les politiques financières et sanitaires ne deviennent cohérentes. Enfin, la voix de l'Afrique doit être entendue sur la scène mondiale pour obtenir un financement adéquat, notamment pour la santé et le climat. Cette rencontre doit transformer les débats en actions concrètes pour bâtir une Afrique plus résiliente et solidaire. Monsieur le Président de la Science, permettez-moi de rappeler ici le fait choquant que nous avons eu sur la réalité de l'aide humanitaire, notamment une problématique cruciale, pressante pour notre continent, suite à la réduction du budget des organisations des Nations Unies. Ils affectent directement la population la plus vulnérable. Nous sommes obligés à trouver des solutions pour cela. Certains budgets des organisations qui viennent à l'aide aux personnes déplacées à l'intérieur de l'Afrique ont connu une réduction de plus de 70%. Il va falloir aussi que dans notre quête d'une solution de santé, nous n'oublions pas les couches des populations les plus vulnérables, les déplacés et ceux qui cherchent une vie meilleure dans nos respectives frontières. Nos solutions de santé doivent aussi tenir en compte de leur existence. Pour conclure, mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais rappeler que financer la santé revient à financer l'avenir de l'Afrique. Une population en bonne santé constitue le socle d'une Afrique prospère, compétitive et souveraine, avec une volonté politique affirmée, un dialogue renforcé entre le ministère de la Santé et des Finances et les partenariats innovants. Nous avons les moyens de combler le déficit actuel et d'ouvrir une nouvelle ère de progrès et de prospérité pour les continents. Je suis convaincue que le rapport final et la déclaration ministérielle de Johannesburg consacreront ces engagements et traceront une feuille de route claire, traduisant nos ambitions collectives et nos besoins réels en actions concrètes au service de la santé et du développement durable en Afrique. Je vous remercie. Je ne sais pas si on dit asante sana, c'est ça? Hein? C'est ça? En Swahili, on dit asante sana. Muchísimas gracias and thank you very much. Shukran. C'est ça, non? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate it. Right, the next, I'll also be making some opening remarks, and so it's from myself. My name is Neil Reichenberg, the Minister of Finance in Eswatini, the current STC Chairperson of the Bureau. So, Your Excellency, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, Minister of Finance, the Republic of South Africa, our gracious host, Excellencies, Ministers present here today, Your Excellency, Francisca Belobe, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Minerals, Africa Union Commission, Your Excellency, Ambassador Amatum Amor, Commissioner of the Health, Humanitarian Services and Social Development Department of the Africa Union Commission, Your Excellency, Dr. Jean Kaseya, Director General of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Hanan Morsi, Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, distinguished representatives from the African Development Bank Group, distinguished representatives from Frexim Bank, distinguished experts from the Africa Union member states, representatives of regional economic communities, representatives of international organizations, representatives of Pan-African institutions, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all, but it's just turning from morning to afternoon, so hello to everybody here. It's both my honor and privilege, in my capacity as chair of the Bureau of the Specialized Technical Committee, to welcome you to the ministerial segment of the 8th STC on Finance, Monetary Affairs, Economic Planning and Integration. I extend my deepest appreciation to our hosts, the Republic of South Africa, for the warm hospitality, and to the Africa Union Commission for its commitment to convening us at this pivotal moment. We gather at a time when the African continent stands at crossroads, as a few of us have mentioned today, confronted by persistent debt and health vulnerabilities, mounting financial needs, and volatile global trade dynamics. Yet it's also a time of immense opportunity. This STC meeting builds upon the critical theme, which is bridging Africa's health financing gap in a changing geoeconomic context, challenges and potential solutions. While health financing remains central, the breadth of our agenda today reminds us that financing, taxation, trade, and investments are inseparably linked. Debt sustainability, domestic resource mobilization, fair trade regimes, integrated value and production chains, and credible credit ratings are not abstract policy issues. They are the very instruments by which we'll achieve inclusive development and resilience. Our deliberations over the next 2 days will be centered on aligning fiscal and health imperatives, addressing G20 priorities and expert insights, examining global trade regimes in the changing global context, tackling impediments to Africa's growth, and advancing outcomes for the inaugural Africa Union Debt Conference, particularly the progress towards establishing the Africa Credit Rating Agency. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the debt issue is perhaps the single most pressing challenge preventing the continent from realizing the infrastructure and social development ambitions of its sovereign governments. Africa's debt has ballooned to unsustainable levels, with nearly half of our member states at high risk of debt distress or already in distress. Servicing this debt consumes a disproportionate share of our fiscal space, often outstripping expenditure on health, education, and infrastructure. The conference on debt held in Lome, Togo in May 2025 provided an opportunity for a unified voice, advancing concrete proposals, reforms to the G20 Common Framework, inclusion on private creditors in restructuring, and streamlining negotiation processes in an environment of certainty. It underscored the urgent need for Africa to have its own credible and independent rating agency, an institution that will reflect our realities, recognize reforms, and insulate the continent from biased and often pro-cyclical ratings which are issued by dominant global rating agencies. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, if debt is the symptom, inadequate domestic resource mobilization is the underlying condition. Africa continues to mobilize, on average, less than 17% of GDP in tax revenues, compared to over 30% in advanced economies. This revenue gap leaves us dependent on external financing, making the continent vulnerable to external economic shocks. Having discussions on inclusive domestic revenue mobilization and tax justice during this ministerial segment is therefore timely. We must leverage on innovative tax instruments such as health taxes, environmental levies, and digital economy taxation, while also strengthening our tax administrations through modern systems, data integration, and cross-border cooperation. Domestic resource mobilization is not only about raising more funds, it's also about raising funds using the most innovative approaches. There's always the need to strike the proper balance between efficiency and equity, and ensuring that taxation supports investments and protects the vulnerable and drives sustainable industrialization. It is in this context that the United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation is accorded great importance. The Africa Union has been at the forefront of shaping this new global framework. By actively engaging in the negotiations, Africa is not only safeguarding its taxing rights in the digital and globalized economy, but also laying the foundation for a fairer international tax environment. Beyond tax, Africa faces a structural financing gap, estimated over $200 billion annually. There's overwhelming evidence that traditional financing sources such as aid and concessional loans are insufficient and come with onerous conditions. Therefore, there's a need to diversify the approaches to financing our African economies. Blended finance could be harnessed to de-risk projects and crowd in private investments. Pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds must be mobilized towards infrastructure and productive sectors rather than being held offshore. Innovative instruments such as green bonds, diaspora bonds, and sustainability-linked loans should be scaled up. Equally important is improving our public financial management systems to ensure that every shilling, rand, lilangeni, naira, or pula mobilized is effectively utilized. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the recent imposition of the US tariffs on Africa exports brings into sharp focus the vulnerability of our economies to global trade shocks. While these measures threaten our exports and investment flows, they also highlight the urgency of accelerating the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as the anchor of our collective resilience. Africa must shift from being passive price takers in global value chains to becoming active players in regional and continental value chains. Africa is brimming with opportunities. However, to fully unlock this potential and attract investors, it's necessary to strengthen policy certainty and present Africa as a unified and reliable investment destination. Without deliberate policy interventions to create predictable demand and scale to attract investment in local industries, Africa risks remaining dependent on external supplies, undermining the objectives of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. As we reflect on the impediments to Africa's growth in the form of weak institutions, inadequate infrastructure, macroeconomic vulnerabilities, and the high cost of capital, let us remember that solutions lie within our collective agency. These include enhanced governance and accountability, closing the infrastructure gap by leveraging public-private partnerships, fostering more AfCFTA-led regional projects, and lowering the cost of capital by reforming perceptions through our own credit rating mechanisms and credible fiscal frameworks. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, inter-Africa trade is estimated to be 15% of total trade on Africa. This is very low compared to the around 60 to 70% of trade in Asia and the European Union. Another glaring missed opportunity is that continues to undermine GDP growth and domestic resource mobilization are these anemic continental trade, production, and value chains that sees the continent export our jobs. The money to purchase everyday consumables that could be purchased at scale in Africa is currently enriching other continents. Africa's annual public sector imports are estimated at nearly $1 trillion. This massive purchasing power largely lies within African governments that could be used to turn around the fortunes of our continent. To this end, I challenge African governments to consider developing and implementing policies that will leverage government procurement and divert these considerable resources to increase inter-Africa trade, drive industrialization and economic integration for inclusive growth and sustainable development on our continent. As I conclude, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the people of Africa look to us not just for analysis, but for solutions. The agenda before us is ambitious, but it is necessary. Let us deliberate candidly and in solidarity, ensuring that the decisions we take here directly inform the outcomes of Agenda 2063 and impact the daily lives of all the citizens on Africa. With these words, I welcome you all once again and look forward to fruitful deliberations. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, that takes us then to the end of all our opening remarks. We are about an hour over time, but we will see what we can do about that as we go. The next very quick one is just to adopt the actual agenda and the work program. So all of us have in front of us, there's been some small changes, but I think there was a printed copy that was distributed around. I think we're all holding it. So just to see ministers and those present, are we comfortable with the current agenda? Are there any changes that have been recommended around that? I don't see any changes recommended. Can I ask someone to possibly move that we adopt the agenda? We got Zimbabwe moving. Can we have someone seconding that? Sorry, are we saying, who do we have there? Namibia, right, okay, thank you. We have Namibia seconding that decision. Thank you very much. That then means that we can comfortably continue moving along with the agenda that we have in front of us. And so the next one, we've then got one session between us and lunch, or a family photo, then lunch. and that is a joint finance and health ministerial and central bank governors discussion on the theme of the STC.